Thanks, and thanks to the organizers for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk about joint work with Charles and with Pietro Caputo, who is in Rome. And the talk will be devoted to the problem of estimating the rate of convergence of random walk on large graphs. So this is very much connected to the spectral properties of the adjacency matrix of the graph, and I hope this will be of interest to the audience. So here is the menu. The first thing I will do is give a brief introduction to this generic phenomenon called the cutoff phenomenon for Markov chains. So this was discovered by David Aldous and Percy Diaconis back in the 80s. And it's a remarkable sharp transition to equilibrium for Markov chains, which is very general. Then I will switch to a specific class of Markov chains, which are random walks on large directed graphs. I will give some motivations for why studying those objects, both theoretical and applied motivations. I will give you a few results that we have obtained, and if time permits, I'll enter into just heuristic arguments for the proof. All right. So the basic theory of mixing of Markov chain is well known, right? If you have a simple Markov chain on a finite state space, right? So assume that the transition matrix is irreducible and aperiodic, so that you have a unique equilibrium law by Perron-Frobenius theorem. Then you immediately get convergence to equilibrium, right? So for any initial state x, as the number of steps tends to infinity, the distribution of your chain converges to this unique equilibrium law, right? This is well known. Now, in practice, the crucial question is how fast this convergence occurs, right? So when I say in practice, I really mean that so there are many applications of Markov chains, in particular Monte Carlo and Metropolis algorithms, where really the speed of this convergence is a crucial thing. Right. So now, if you want to measure this thing, you first need to have a way of quantifying the distance to equilibrium. You have two distributions on the state space. So a natural choice is to take the total variation distance to measure them. This is not the only choice. You have several other options, but this is one of the canonical ones. And if you want to insist on the fact that the convergence should be uniform in the initial state, you then put a max over all possible initial states, right? So this is the object that I will be interested in. Now this function has a very nice properties. So it's 0,1 valued. It's always decreasing. It decays to 0, of course. And it decays to 0 exponentially fast in t, right? This is given by the spectral GOP. At least in the reversible setting, you get exponential convergence to equilibrium, right? So if you look at the distance to equilibrium for a large chain, and it starts close to 1. So this is d of t. And then it converges to 0, and this result here tells you something about how fast it gets to 0 once it's already very small, right? It's a kind of relaxation time that is given by this, right? If you define relaxation time as 1/1 minus this lambda 2, then these times will give you the typical time at which typical decay time near 0. Okay, so this is all very well known, but David Aldous and Percy Diaconis in the 80s observed that this was not really the point in practice, because in practice what you really want to know is not how this decay occurs when t is already large, but how long does it take to actually starting being small, right? So it's rather this distance here than the distance near 0, right? So you fix a precision epsilon, but not arbitrarily small, really fixed. Think of it as being 1/2. And then you ask the question, how long does it take for the distance to reach 1/2? Right? And now, of course, you are interested in large state space, so the asymptotics will be as the number of states n tends to infinity for a fixed precision instead of this thing, which was a precision tending to 0, but fixed state space. So it's a kind of change of point of view, which was very, very successful, I think. All right. So let me give you a simple example, actually an historical example. That's the one, card shuffling was a problem that Percy Diaconis and David Aldous looked at a lot. So imagine you have a deck of n cards, take n equals 52. How long should you shuffle this deck before you can consider that it's properly mixed? Right? So to formalize that as a Markov chain, the state space is pretty obvious. You take the set of all possible orderings of the n cards. Right? And now you have to define a way of shuffling your deck. There are many ways of doing so, and actually many of them have been studied, but let me focus on one very simple, very naive one, not very realistic though, which is the so-called top to random shuffle. So you have your deck of cards, and at each step you take the top card of your deck and insert it randomly inside the deck. Right? So that's one way of shuffling your deck. How many times should you repeat this before your deck is mixed? Right? So it's not hard to see that for this dynamic, the equilibrium law is just the uniform law. So you are indeed mixing your deck. And what Aldous and Diaconis showed is that the number of steps that you need to make is actually n log n. And n log n is in a very strong sense. Namely, regardless of the precision, as long as it is fixed, so you fix any epsilon, and the time it takes for the distance to equilibrium to reach epsilon is n log n, as n tends to infinity. Right? So the important thing here is that the epsilon does not matter. Right? To first order, the dependence in epsilon is absent of the mixing time. And this is something quite remarkable. If you want to translate it, maybe it's more easily sparse this way. If you take 0.99 n log n steps, then basically your distance is 1. If you shuffle this just a bit more, so 1.01 n log n times, then the deck is completely mixed. It's useless to continue mixing. Right, so for practical application, it's really important to know this, because if you stop just before that, basically you have done nothing. And if you continue just after that, basically you are doing useless thing. Right? Okay, so that's the cutoff phenomenon. Now you can go a bit further than that, of course, since everything seems to happen inside a small window around n log n. Right? So in this case, the distance does something very sharp around n log n. You really want to zoom inside this window and see what happened exactly around n log n. How does the distance go from 1 to 0 inside this window? And in this example, this was done by Diaconis, Phil, and Pittman in 90. So they realized that the correct window is actually of order just n, so much smaller than this n log n mixing time. And inside this small window, so if you fix the constant lambda could be negative or positive, right? You are really traversing this critical window. And for fixed lambda, of course, the distance converges to some constant between 0 and 1. And the precise function phi was even given explicitly in this paper. It's awfully complicated. It's an infinite sum, which I don't want to write here. But really, you have a limiting shape for this curve here inside the window when you properly rescale. Okay. So this was just an example to motivate what follows. But so in 86, David Aldous and Percy Diaconis realized that this would be that this is far from being an isolated phenomenon, and so they gave a general definition, which is exactly what should be the cutoff phenomenon, right? So you have the time it takes to mix up to precision 1 minus epsilon, and those two should be the same asymptotically. So that's the definition that they gave. You have a sequence of Markov chain indexed by n, and think of n as the number of states in your system, or at least as some index measuring the size of your state space. And as n tends to infinity, you say that there is cutoff if, to first order, the mixing time does not depend on epsilon. So that's the definition. Again, it really means that there is a sharp transition from 1 to 0 for the distance to equilibrium. So they gave this definition in '86, but actually the first examples of a cutoff were discovered before that. So in '81, so Diaconis and Shashahani studied another way of shuffling a deck of cards, where you just choose two positions uniformly at random in your deck and exchange the cards. Okay, so they proved the cutoff for this. Other example quickly followed, so by David Aldous. Random walk on the hypercube is just, like you have n random bits, n bits, and at each step you choose one uniformly at random and you re-randomize it. How long does it take to forget where you started? The one that I just talked about came in '86, and then quickly after that, many other examples were found. I won't give all the details, but one large class of chains for which typically cutoff is expected is random walks on finite groups. Right? So, in particular, Saloff-Coste has many results in that direction. Other example, other class of chains for which cutoff is very well understood is the birth and death chains, right? So chain living on Z. There also you have enough structure to make a precise computation and actually characterize precisely when cutoff does occur and when cutoff does not occur. Okay. Now, if you look at those examples, they are quite special in the sense that you have a lot of structure in the Markov chain. I mean, the random walk on groups, you have a lot of harmonic analysis at your disposal to make explicit computations. The equilibrium measure is always the uniform measure, I mean, in most of the cases. And so those examples are showing that really you need some kind of structure in order to get the cutoff. The cutoff is a hard thing to prove just because of the following thing. So you have many bonds that gives you upper and lower bounds for T-mix of epsilon, right? In terms of the relaxation time, for example, let me just give you one. So it's less than the relaxation times time log of pi min, where pi min is the minimal mass under the equilibrium measure. So for the uniform measure, it would be log n. So this is a bond. You have other bond in the other direction in the reversible case. But the problem with those bonds are that they are up to correction here. So typically you have constant here and here. And those constants completely miss the point of the cutoff phenomenon, because in the cutoff phenomenon you really need to get the precise constant here. It's to check whether it depends on epsilon or not, you really need this precision. And this is a very fine computation which you can only do when your Markov chain has enough structure. So far, at least. Now, there was a change, this has changed recently. The techniques have become sufficiently powerful to address much more complicated, much more sophisticated Markov chains. And one landmark paper in that direction was the study of the random walk on random regular graphs. So now the Markov chain itself, the transition matrix itself is random, right? It's the normalized adjacency matrix of a random regular graph. Now we have seen in many talks this week that random regular graphs are very good expanders. Actually, they are optimal expanders in the spectral sense. And this should imply that the mixing properties of those graphs should be extremely good, right? But it took a long time to actually determine the precise number of steps that you need for a random walk on those graphs to mix. And this was done so by Lubetzky and Sly. And the funny thing is that they actually use the non-backtracking random walk to understand the simple random walk. So that's a nice other argument in favor of the use of non-backtracking random walks. This reduces completely the noise in this object, and this makes the proof work. Then they use a kind of correspondence between random walk and non-backtracking random walk, which is valid on regular graphs, but which fails to be valid on a more general graph. So this result was very recently generalized actually to all Ramanujan graphs, even almost Ramanujan graphs, so it's really a generalization. So this is very recent, last summer, I guess. Lubetzky and Perez established that. And the idea of the proof are very similar to that. Okay. Now you have other models of graph, and in particular, if you think of more realistic networks like the internet graph, you really wish to play a bit more with the degrees, so you have other models. The Erdős-Rényi is one of them, but much more generally, you could look at arbitrary degrees. You have models for that, and this has also been studied. So there are two papers. So the first paper, so they appeared simultaneously and independently. The first paper is really on the simple random walk, which is a hard object to study. The second one is only on the non-backtracking random walk, but there it's the exact shape of the function inside the window is determined. So. Okay, so that's it for the history. Let me just point out one more example, because there is a wide class of examples of Markov chains for which the cutoff is expected. And those are Markov chains coming from statistical physics. So you have many models, spin models in statistical physics, where particles sit on the vertices of graphs, and they interact with each other. So the Markov chain is really this, the update of their state depending on the neighbors. And for those chains, if the temperature is high enough, typically the dynamic is fast. Those are fast mixing Markov chain, and it's expected that they would exhibit cutoff. So this has been established for some of the models. Quite recently, actually, the techniques have been given a very powerful, very powerful techniques have been developed by Lubetzky and Sly, but still there are many examples that are not understood. So all in all, it's a phenomenon that starts to be understood, but which is still far from being so. And just to give an example, just because estimating this constant in front of the true constant in front of the order of growth of Tmx is hard, people have tried to determine simple criteria that allows you to determine whether or not there would be a cutoff without actually making the precise computation of this. So one of those criteria was proposed by Yuval Perez in 2004. So Yuval suspected that at least for reversible chains, it should be true that so cutoff should occur if and only if Tmx is large compared to the relaxation time. And so this makes a lot of sense, actually, if you think about it. And this is a very nice criterion, because then you don't need to actually compute Tmx up to the constant factor in front. You just need to get the order of this and an estimate on the spectral gap of your chain, and that should be enough to conclude that there is or there is no cutoff. Unfortunately, counterexamples have been constructed for this, and so far it's not clear. No general criterion is really known.
Which direction?
Huh?
Which direction?
So this one is always true, but the useful one is not.
So it's proof that way?
Yeah, this way is proof. For reversible chains. Okay, so also one particular aspect in which the phenomenon is not really understood is that if you look at the list of examples, you will notice that there are only very few examples that are reversible. And for non-reversible chains, most of the theory breaks down, actually. You don't have a clear connection between the spectrum and the properties of the mixing properties of your chain. You also lose any understanding of your measure, because when you are given a reversible chain, almost by definition, you are given the measure corresponding, the equilibrium measure corresponding to your chain. But for outside this reversible setting, you don't even know, you don't even understand the measure in many cases. So that was the starting point of our work, and we wanted to study at least an example outside this world. And when you think of random walk on random graphs, or at least on large graphs, the natural thing to do is to look at random walks on directed graphs to make this non-reversible. So what do I mean by that? Well, you take any directed graph, you can define a Markov chain as follows. The state space is just the set of vertices, and the transition matrix just corresponds to, so from every vertex, you just choose uniformly at random an outgoing edge, and you traverse it. Right? So that's the transition matrix for this chain. And then you can start asking questions such as how long does it take for the walk to forget where it started, right? So in the sense that I defined previously. But also something which was completely trivial in the non-directed setting. What does the equilibrium law actually look like? Right? For an undirected graph, the reversible law is trivial. It's just proportional to the degree, right? Divided by the number of edges. Right? But outside this non-directed setting, you completely lose this, and there is no explicit expression for pi. It's not at all clear what this pi looks like. Even more, if you think of your graph as being extremely large, so this is G, and you want to estimate this the equilibrium law at a certain vertex X, you don't have any bound on how far you should look at in order to determine pi of x. It can be arbitrarily complicated. It can be an arbitrarily complicated function of the whole network. Right?
So the one version, if you have an irreducible thing, say that you have uniformly distributed eigenvalues of the modulus 1 in the complex circle, and that would imply current and periodic solutions. All other eigenvalues, so that's the general theorem for irreducible Markov chains. You have one eigenvalue which is 1,
Mm-hmm.
and then if it's degenerate in modulus, they must be equipositioned on the unit circle of the complex plane.
Okay, so.
That would characterize what's happening.
So in the example that we will look at, there will not be any issue of, I mean, it will be irreducible and aperiodic. There will be no other eigenvalues on the unit circle except from the, okay.
So if you know the graph is regular,
Yeah,
and then you know the
yeah, then,
law,
yes.
then you know the answer?
Yes. So there is one special case where this is the uniform measure. I mean, when this formula is still true, is just when for every vertex, the outgoing degree is the same as the in degree. In that case, the measure is really this measure. So in that case, you know exactly what the invariant law is. But in general, no.
But the first question is easier then?
The mixing, no. No. It's not obvious, at least. But anyway. Okay, so this you could probably solve for pi in this 6x6 matrix. But what I'm having in mind is rather those kinds of graphs, right? So this is a picture of the internet graphs in a few years ago. So this graph has 10 to the 12 vertices and 6 or 7 times more edges, right? So it's sparse, right? The average degree is 6 or 7, something that does not grow with the size of the networks, but still it's a very complicated object. The degrees are very different from one side to the other, and understanding the random walk on this kind of object is hard. So it may seem a bit weird to do random walk on this kind of graph, but that's actually what Google does, right? And So if you want to navigate inside a network where you don't really know the structure, it turns out that performing random walk is one very good way of doing so. And actually, even the Google PageRank algorithm, the thing that determines the ordering of the web page when you do a search in Google, right? It's a complicated problem. You need to assign a sort of measure of importance to every web page in the internet. And of course, what you want to do is that if a site has a lot of links pointing to it, then it should be important. But this should depend also on whether those pages are important themselves or not. And also it should be very different if an important page just points to you, or if it points to many other web pages. If you try to write the equation for that, you exactly get this. Right? So actually what Google does is just trying to compute the equilibrium measure for the internet graph. Okay. So that was just a motivation. Of course, this kind of graph is too complicated to be understood. It's still a big problem in random graph theory to come up with models that are more realistic with respect to that kind of networks. But let's try something a bit simpler. So let's take a random directed graph with given degrees. So there is a very natural way of defining a random directed graphs, where you can even choose the degrees, both the out degrees and the in degrees. And this works as follows. It's very close to the configuration model, if you already know it, for the non-directed case. So you give yourself a sequence of in degrees. So for each vertex, you know the in and out degree that you would like this vertex to have, and then you want to come up with a model where you construct a random directed graph with those degrees. Right? So of course, if you want to do that, the degrees should match. The sum of the heads and the tails should be the same. So let's call this value m. Now, under that condition, you can do a very simple thing. Right? You start by assigning the correct number of heads and tails to each vertex. And then you just pick at random a bijection to connect those heads and tails. Right? This gives you a multi-graph because you can have multiple edges and loops, self-loops. But it has the correct in and out degrees, and it's sufficiently random. Actually, if you condition this graph on not having loops and multiple edges, then you get the uniform distribution on the set of directed graphs with these degrees. So that's the natural model in this class. Okay, so formally you just define those two sets and you pick a uniform random bijection to create your graph. Is this construction clear? Okay. So here is a simulation before I move to the results. So in this case, I take the model that I just described with 3,000 vertices. So I divided them into 3 classes. So there are 1,000 vertices with out degrees 3 and in degrees 2, and the other ones are written there. Right? And I generate a random graph according to the model that I described. Now you can compute the Perron eigenvector. You can also compute the powers of your matrix, and you can actually compute the total variation distance. And here is the plot of what you get. Right? So there are two remarkable things in this illustration. The first, perhaps surprising thing is that only 7 or 8 steps are enough to completely forget where you came from and to be distributed according to the equilibrium measure. So in a huge network, I mean, 10,000 edges. So that's surprising. And also the second important thing is, of course, that the first 5 or 6 steps are completely useless. I mean, the distance does not decrease at all. And then suddenly you seem to have a transition to 0. Right? So the cutoff seems to be clear, at least on this illustration, and that's what we wanted to establish rigorously. Okay. So here are a few...
First few steps you're supported on a small set.
Yeah. So you easily get a lower bound, but it's not clear that... you will see that the constant is quite surprising, the precise order at which... it's not connected to the diameter of the graph. It's something different from that. Right? Of course, you need at least the diameter of the graph before you are really mixed, but it's much more than that, actually. Okay. So let's make some assumptions. So since I'm interested in the cutoff phenomenon, which is an asymptotic phenomenon, you need to have for each n a sequence of degrees. So you have graphs that are larger and larger, but for each size, you have your own sequence of degrees. It can be arbitrarily. I don't assume any convergence on those degrees. However, I make a big assumption, which is that the degrees are bounded uniformly, independently of n. Okay? So the degrees depends on n, but I dropped the index for ease of notation. Okay, so think of delta as being 1,000. I'm only concerned with graphs with at most 1,000 neighbors for each side. Okay. Also, I insist on the fact that the minimum degree should be at least 2, and this is to avoid complication, as you mentioned. You want the graph to be strongly connected, right, so that there is really a unique equilibrium measure, and that's something you need for that. Okay. So under those assumptions, what can you say about the speed of convergence? A priori, it should be something very complicated, which depends in a complicated way on the geometry of your graph. But it turns out that the only thing that matters is the kind of logarithmic branching number. So this statistic, which is, can view it as just the average logarithmic degree of a vertex. It's not really the average in the naive sense, which would be just sum over all vertices, the log of the out degrees. Right? Right? You don't take a uniform vertex to compute this average. You take a vertex, you rather take a uniform edge and look at the endpoint of that. So that's why vertices that have a large number of incoming edges count more in this sum. Right? Anyway, so that's a parameter that depends in a simple way on your degree sequence. And yes, m was the total number of arcs. So it's just a normalization so that this thing is 1. Plus or minus is 1. Okay, and the result is that the number of steps it takes to mix in such a model is just log n divided by mu. And again, it's in this very strong sense that just before that you basically did nothing, and just after that you are completely mixed. Right? So remember that the chain is random, so it's the distance to equilibrium itself is random, but so the convergence is in probability. What it really means is that for most directed graphs with the given degrees, the mixing time is log n over mu. Right? For the non-directed case, the speed is not explicit. Yeah, it's a complicated thing.
So it's not non-backtracking one?
Non-backtracking work on undirected graph, then the speed is explicit, and it's quite close to this expression. Yeah. The main difference being that the measure is absolutely unknown in this setting, whereas in the non-backtracking case on an undirected graph, the invariant measure is very simple. It's just the degree, proportional to the degree. So that's the main issue here. Okay, now you want to know what happens inside the window. So for lambda equals to 1 in this result, and it turns out that the window in that case is not. So here it has become something like log n over mu. And now the window here is the square root of that, square root of log n. So everything happens in a small window, square root of log n, around the mixing time. Okay, so there is a constant sigma. The sigma is just the variance associated to the mu, so also a simple statistics of your degree sequences. This sigma will be bounded by our assumptions, but it could be arbitrarily close to 0. It could even be 0 in a degenerate case where everything is regular. I just want to avoid this, so I insist that sigma is non-degenerate. You really have a variance in your degree sequence. This is just needed for this result. It's not technical. It's actually here for a good reason. I mean, we suspect that without this condition, you get some different result. Okay, so you just think of it as being bounded away from 0, even though this is weaker. Okay.
And the fact that the degrees are different changes the phenomenon?
Yeah. Yeah, if you, I mean, it changes the width of the cutoff here, and it may also affect the shape of this function. If you fall into this degenerate regime where the variance is very, very small, smaller than log n squared. Yeah. Okay, now, so let's look at the t inside this window. So t equals tn plus a fixed constant lambda, which can be negative or positive, in wn. And let's look at the distance to equilibrium. So it will converge to something which is again between 0 and 1, a function which should decrease from 1 to 0, which is deterministic. It actually does not at all depend on the degrees, and it's actually probably the simplest decreasing function for probabilist. It's the tail distribution of the Gaussian variable. So if you zoom, what this means is that the shape of this, if you zoom in, is just given by this simple function phi. And this function is universal in the sense that I mean, really it does not depend at all on the geometry of your graph and on the choice of the degree. So that was quite a surprise for us. All right. Okay, so just to put this into a picture, that's what the theorem says. Okay, now another set of results before I talk a bit about heuristics for the proof. Those results were for the worst possible initial state, right? But by convexity, this is the same as looking at the worst possible initial distribution, right? Even if you relax the constraint of being a direct mass at a vertex, it's the same thing. Right? Now, if you change the maximum, the first maximum to a minimum, then the result that I presented is also true. So actually, the speed of convergence and the shape of the profile does not depend on the precise choice of your vertices. There is no vertex which has a preferred different behavior. Now, if you change the second maximum to a minimum, then of course it changes everything. You could even take the nu equals pi, and then of course the result is different, right? So the question was, what does happen if you change a bit, if you allow for more spread out distributions than just starting at a fixed vertex, right? And the natural choice would be the uniform distribution, but again, it's uniform on the edges, so when you project that on the vertices, you get the in-degree distribution. Right? So let's start with this distribution and look at how long does it take for the walk to converge. This should be more related to the relaxation time, right? Because you are really much closer to equilibrium, and you want to know how long it takes to come back to equilibrium. Right? And in that case, everything is governed by, again, a simple statistics, which is the average reciprocal degree. So instead of taking the log in the formula before, you take 1 over d plus. Right? This is bounded by 1/2 by our assumptions. And now you get exponential convergence independent of the size of the network. So if you start from the uniform distribution, after say 10 steps, you are already completely mixed independently of n. Right? So there is this log n has completely disappeared. Right? So when you look at this equation, it really looks like having a spectral gap. Right? That's the kind of thing that you would expect, at least for a reversible chain. That's what you would get if you knew that the spectral gap is rho. Right? So here the matrix is directed. Rho is actually the spectral radius of the Galton-Watson tree that is approximating this random graph in the Benjamin-Ishram sense. So it should be intuitively the spectral gap of your chain, but it's, I mean, in the undirected setting, the relation between the spectrum of your operator and the spectrum of the limit in the Benjamin-Ishram sense is not really clear. Right? Even in the deregular case, I guess Pierre mentioned on the first day that I mean, the natural candidate for the spectrum of the adjacency matrix of a directed deregular graph is the one that is given by the infinite directed deregular tree, but this is still a conjecture. Right. So this does not follow from a spectral gap. We cannot get it from a spectral gap inequality here. Still, we believe that the spectral gap should be rho for this chain, and we are currently working on that. But
What's that?
the maximum degree, so it's fixed, completely fixed constant. Okay. So this has an important corollary for us. I did this for this reason, actually, that what the total variation inequality says is that if you look at this pi x, it should be very close to new ET of x, at least for most vertices. Right? Total variation distance is an L1 distance. And the nice thing with this expression is that this is completely determined by the ball of radius t around x. Right? So somehow this thing says that the mass assigned to a vertex is actually a local thing. It can be determined from the Benjamin-Ishram limit of your graph. Under this this global result, which is given by this theorem. But thanks to that, you know that your spectral measure is actually a simple object. It should be directly determined on the Galton-Watson tree. And so this gives us a way to get a very nice description of this measure pi, just on the Galton-Watson tree.
But aren't these graphs, I mean, they are small worlds anyway, so your local environment is the first of the graph, isn't it? So it's T that...
No, so I made a strong assumption, which is that the delta is the maximum degree is bounded, right? So I'm not in this small world regime. Okay, so here is a plot of the equilibrium measure. So for the same example as before, so 3,000 vertices divided into 3 categories. Right? So those are the different weights under the equilibrium measure multiplied by n. Right? So if the measure was the uniform measure, then you would get just a peak, a direct peak at 1. But here you see a whole bunch of values. Right? The values here correspond to the web pages that you would see first in your Google search, right? Those that receive a lot of mass, and those are the ones that are way below. Right? The surprising thing is that if you increase n while keeping the same proportions of in and out degrees, this will stabilize to some limiting shape, which is deterministic and which actually is a density, right? So absolutely continuous. And this is the content of the next theorem. Okay, so for this you need a measure on probability distributions, and the measure that works here is the Firth-Wasserstein distance. So think of it as this encodes weak convergence plus convergence of the first moment, and this is important for us. It really means that in this picture the total mass is really 1. So you don't have a part of the mass of your equilibrium law, which is concentrated on a negligible subset of vertices. Right.
If you separate this diagram into 3 groups.
Yeah, then you would. I mean, of course, this depends on the fact that you have 3 groups, and you can, with the result that we have, you can look at what it gives on each specific degrees. But still, it will be a density thing, because it does not really depend only on your degree, but on what happens around you, and this is random. But you can, if you want, you can get. I don't have pictures, but I could make that. Okay, so here is the result. So in this distance, this histogram, this blue histogram that I just showed, is very close to a deterministic measure, L, which of course depends on your precise degree sequence. But this measure is deterministic, and it admits an absolutely continuous density. And it's determined directly on the Galton-Watson tree that is approximating your graph in the Benjamin-Ishram sense. So I won't go into the details, but that's the recursive distributional equation that you get. The nice thing for us was that this equation has actually extensively been studied in other contexts. It appears in the context of Mandelbrot cascades and coagulation fragmentation processes. And so people studying this had to also infer some properties of the distribution L from the from the impute parameters, the degrees in our case. And so they already did all the work for us, so you can get almost everything you want about L by looking at those references. So I won't go into the details, but just one I guess, surprising property is that the measure is always absolutely continuous, whatever the choice of degrees is. So that's one thing you get. But you can also get information on the tails, right and left tails, and things like that.
Sorry, can you just say again, what is this delta n phi I?
So this is the empirical distribution of the. So it's really this. It's this object, right? So pi is the equilibrium measure. You look at the weights of the equilibrium measure. So if it's uniform, then every vertex receives 1 over n. So this measure would be just direct mass at 1. But for a more general equilibrium law, those are the weights that you see. So right. You look at the collection of weights. Forget about the structure of your graph, just look at those numbers, those pi of x, this collection of numbers. Right? You renormalize so that you see something. And
And it's going to infinity.
yeah. Right. So that's the end for the result. Now, just in a couple of minutes, I just want to give the main idea behind the proof of this. So the funny thing is that it's probably not a surprise, but many of the tools that we use have actually been mentioned during the week. I mean, they are very much connected to the study of the spectrum of the graph, just because both things amount to the same goal, which is to get an understanding of the number of paths between vertices, long paths between vertices. The thing is that here, because it's a Markov chain, you don't really care about the paths themselves, but you need to take into account also the weight of those paths. So it's not the same for a walk to follow a path which has a lot of out degrees and a path which has very few out degrees, right? So those paths will get very different weights in the random walk measure, and so you really need to do a weighted counting of those paths. But apart from that, the techniques are the same. In particular, this very nice idea that appears already in Friedman's paper, the tangle-free, the notion of tangle-free paths plays a very important role in this proof. Okay, so that's the key picture, that you can approximate locally the neighborhood of two vertices by trees. Of course, this is true if the radius is small. Unfortunately, the mixing time of the walk is larger than the diameter, so at this scale you will see cycles, and you have to take care of those. But let's assume for simplicity that everything is really tree-like. Right? So then you get this picture, and you can express the probability of being at j after t steps as a sum, the sum appearing above. Right? So you decompose the sum according to the last edge that you visit in the neighborhood of I and the first edge that you visit in the neighborhood of j. Right? So just a way of decomposing this. And this allows to make this indicator appear, which is the indicator that the last edge is matched by my random bijection that defines the graph, is matched to f. So it seems like a very weird way of writing things, but actually the whole proof is inside this, hidden inside this identity.
Looks like you're not decomposing according to the edge, you're decomposing according to the time.
No, so okay, so
So then you're summing over the edge at that time.
yeah. Yeah, so I'm interested in a fixed time t. I just break t into t minus s and s, and you have to choose this appropriately, but yeah. Now, if you look just at this indicator, forget about the rest, the marginal distribution of this is just a Bernoulli with parameter 1 over n, just because it's a random bijection, right? Now, of course, they are not independent, it's a random bijection, but you have nice concentration results for random bijection on a large set, so you can still pretend that this is those are independent. So now let's forget about this. Suppose you remove this and look at the sum that remains. Now the sum becomes separable. You have the part corresponding to I and the part corresponding to j. The part corresponding to I sums to 1, just because it's a probability measure. Right? Sum over all possibilities for E, and then it's 1. And so what remains is just a term that depends only on j, which actually turns out to be connected to the invariant measure at j. Right. Okay, so that's really the idea. Again, it's very heuristic, but that's what happens. And now you see that if you want your mixing to occur, you really want this probability of being at j at time t to be close to pi of j. And this is exactly the same as saying that is in this sum, everything is well concentrated around the mean, right? Somehow. I mean, conditionally on the neighborhood of I and j, that's what you would get, right? So this ratio is close to 1 precisely when your weighted sum of Bernoullis corresponding to this decomposition is concentrated around its mean. Right? But now those weights of the different paths are extremely heterogeneous. Right? You have a collection of heterogeneous weights. Think of them as being deterministic, so you work conditionally on the neighborhood of I and j. And then on top of that, you put a collection of independent Bernoullis with a small parameter. And you want to understand when this sum is close to its expectation, or what is the typical value of this sum. Now, of course, if the weights are all small, then you can get, by variance inequality, you can get concentration. The point is that the weight is not small until t is large enough, and that's precisely what you need for mixing. Right? How well the chain is mixed is exactly the same question as how well this sum is concentrated. And this is exactly the same as saying that the weights should be reasonably spread out. Meaning that in this sum of weights, you should not have too much mass that comes from contribution of large weights. Right? Large weights should be negligible. Otherwise, what you really see is not the expectation, but something less than the expectation. You will not be concentrated. Okay, so that's the reason behind all this. And then it's just a quench central limit theorem that gives you the result that I mentioned. So in our case, the weights were just the probability to follow a certain trajectory. And the argument that I showed at least convinces that the main obstruction to mixing is the existence of paths which has a large weight. And you want to choose t large enough so that almost all the mass is put on paths that have a low weight. Okay. The nice thing is that if you look at a random walk on such a graph, the weight that it sees is just the inverse product of the degrees. But since the graph looks like a Galton-Watson tree, the degrees are just IID random variables, approximatively. So you really understand very well what the typical weight of a path is from the point of view of the walk. And you easily get a central limit theorem for that. So again, the graph G looks like a Galton-Watson tree, at least for the walk. So the walk will just see out degrees that are independent and identically distributed. And therefore, the probability that the weight that the walk sees is more than 1 over m will be can be completely controlled by the Gaussian tail function and with the correct mean and variance. And that's exactly where the cutoff phenomenon comes from. Okay. So it's very, I put many things under the carpet here, but that's where it comes from. Okay, so I'll finish there. Just to conclude, the results were that if you take most directed graphs, you get a cutoff for most of them. So it's a generic phenomenon. The funny thing is that both the location and the window can be determined just by simple statistics. It does not depend in a complicated way on the graph, but just on those parameters mu and sigma. A nice surprise was that the profile is Gaussian. It's a universal thing. And also another surprise was that this measure, equilibrium measure, can be completely understood by the Benjamin-Ishram topology. Okay, so future works in this kind of things. You really want to get rid of the maximum degree assumption, right? If you think of the internet, certain nodes really get a lot of neighbors and other not. So you really want to understand the impact of this. This should really change the behavior of the walks. I mean, there are many things that should fail to hold, and it's interesting to look at that. You can go even beyond that. Degrees are not the only thing that makes a random graph not really realistic. Another thing is that all those models are tree-like, as I have said. And internet is not at all. You have many short cycles and many communities, right? If two neighbors have a larger chance of having common neighbors. And that's a big problem because the tree-like assumption is really crucial in our proof, so I don't know how to get around this. But it would be nice, for example, to look at the preferential attachment model and try to do the same thing. And the last thing is moving away, forgetting about a random walk on a random graph, coming back to the generic question, which is when does cutoff happen? Can you give a generic condition for that? I mean, we can hope that understanding those toy models can give hints on what should be the exact reasons underlying the cutoff phenomenon. So that's the general hope. Okay, well, thanks.
Questions?
Yeah.
Have you sort of tried with simulations to see what happens with FET distribution?
No, not yet.
On the spectral side, it doesn't matter as long as your graph is large enough. You can the tree approximation is really good, even with heavy-tailed distributions.
Yeah, but so many things should change. In particular, what I said is that the mixing time does not depend on the choice of the starting vertex. If you start to have heavy tail degrees, then some vertices will have a very different behavior than others, right? And this will affect a lot the picture. That's one thing. The other thing is that in the limiting measure, so the blue histogram of the weights, you should have really fat tails at the end. Maybe even more than that, you could have a loss of mass. Probably some of the mass of the equilibrium measure should be concentrated on very few vertices, smaller than order n. And this would be very interesting, actually, to have something like that. But no, I don't have any simulations yet.
More questions? I just have.
Are there sort of relative models where, say, each vertex you say what language it's written in, and you know that certain languages will point to other languages, so you have a sort of structure below, but above you have some randomness?
Okay, so I've not thought about this, but this would definitely be more, it's one step towards something more realistic where you have some kind of community structures inside the graph, and this would be interesting. But yeah, so far really everything is really relies on the fact that you have local tree-like structures. So I don't know how to handle this, but certainly it's an interesting direction to follow.
Do you think that relatively, still relative to what you know, you might have some sort of randomness, and then what you're saying should hold relative to context, maybe?
Okay, and that's something to look at, definitely. Yeah.
So, if you want to see how much of your neighborhood you have to look at to determine your weight to a certain precision, this is exponential. Is that right?
Yeah.
So it's exponentially fast.
Yeah.
Radius.
But this really means that you have some spectral radius that is bounded away from zero in this operator. This comes from that. I mean, we suspect that it comes from that, and this will also probably break down if you change the geometry. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? Right. Let's thank our speaker.